Have you ever felt like politicians don't understand your life? You're not alone. A shocking 76% of Americans believe that their leaders are out of touch with everyday struggles. This disconnect is not just a feeling, it's backed by hard facts. For instance, a 2019 study found that nearly half of US senators are millionaires. Meanwhile, over 40% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $400 expense. Why does this gap exist? How can leaders who make laws be so disconnected from the people they represent? In this video, we'll dive deep into the world of politics to uncover the reasons behind this shocking reality. We'll explore the Ivory Tower Syndrome, where politicians live in comfort while ignoring the struggles of average citizens. We'll look at the echo chamber effect, where leaders hear only what they want to hear. Plus, we'll discuss the perks of power that keep politicians from understanding everyday challenges. Join us as we uncover the truth about why most politicians are out of touch with reality. You might be surprised at what we find. Chapter 1: The Ivory Tower Syndrome. Most politicians live in a world far removed from the everyday lives of the people they represent. They operate in what some call the ivory tower, a place of comfort, wealth, and power. This term isn't just a figure of speech. A 2018 study found that over half of US Congress members are millionaires, compared to just 3% of the general population. The average person is struggling with rising living costs, but these politicians often don't feel it the same way. Why does this happen? Well, when you're in a bubble, it's hard to see outside of it. Politicians often surround themselves with advisors and lobbyists who live similar lifestyles, reinforcing their sense of reality. They're driven from meeting to meeting in limos, attending high-profile dinners, and staying in five-star hotels. This disconnect can lead to policies that don't address the real problems people face. This Ivory Tower Syndrome affects not just their views on economics but also on social issues. It's why policies that seem good on paper often miss the mark. A perfect example is the push for expensive healthcare reforms without addressing the crippling out-of-pocket costs most Americans can't afford. In the book The Ruling Class by Angelo M. Codevilla, the author argues that political elites are so detached from the working class that they've become their own ruling class, operating under entirely different social rules. The longer they stay in office, the further removed they become from the struggles of everyday life. This isn't just a US problem, it's global. Studies in the UK and Australia have shown similar patterns of political detachment. In short, once politicians enter this insulated world, it becomes increasingly difficult to understand what the average citizen is going through. Make sure to subscribe for more eye-opening discussions about the dynamics of power in our democracy. Chapter 2: The Echo Chamber Effect. Another key reason why politicians are out of touch is the echo chamber effect. It's a well-known phenomenon where people surround themselves with voices that only reflect their own beliefs. Social media amplifies this, but it's also prevalent in politics. Politicians often create inner circles of loyalists, advisors, and lobbyists who agree with them on almost everything. These people feed back only what the politician wants to hear, further isolating them from reality. A 2021 Pew Research Center study revealed that over 70% of Democrats and Republicans feel they live in their own political bubbles, where their views are rarely challenged. Politicians are no different. This echo chamber makes it hard for them to craft policies that reflect the diverse views of the broader public. Instead, they end up making decisions based on the feedback loop within their tight-knit circles. This issue was highlighted by political scientist Cass Sunstein in his book #Republic, where he talks about how information cocoons distort decision-making. Sunstein notes that when politicians live in these cocoons, they not only misunderstand the issues but also lose touch with the people they're supposed to serve. You've likely seen this in action. Take any election cycle, for instance. Politicians often focus on key voter bases, ignoring the concerns of those outside their immediate support group. This leads to policies that only cater to specific interests. It's why bipartisan cooperation is becoming rare. Politicians are so entrenched in their echo chambers that they no longer see the value in crossing the aisle. The more they stay in these bubbles, the more out of touch they become. Chapter 3: Career Politicians. A life of scripted reality. Many politicians spend decades in office, building entire careers without ever stepping outside the political world. These career politicians often have little to no experience in real-world jobs. For them, politics becomes a scripted reality, one that has little to do with the unscripted challenges most people face daily. A survey by the Congressional Research Service showed that fewer than 20% of US Congress members have a background in blue-collar jobs. This means most of them have never experienced the struggles of working for minimum wage, dealing with healthcare costs, or facing student loan debt. When you spend 20 or 30 years in office, it's easy to forget what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. In the book What It Takes by Richard Ben Kramer, the author talks about how politicians often follow a carefully scripted path to power. They know what to say, when to say it, and how to dodge difficult questions. Their lives become performances, where real-world struggles become distant memories. Over time, this disconnect grows, and they lose touch with the people they were elected to represent. Take the example of the late Senator Robert Byrd, who served for over 50 years. While his long tenure gave him power and influence, many argue that politicians like Byrd, who spend decades in office, can't possibly relate to the lives of average citizens. Long-term politicians are often so focused on keeping their seats that they fail to understand the rapidly changing needs of their constituents. So, what's the problem with career politicians? It's not just the years in office, it's that they stop living in the real world. They're surrounded by staff, donors, and lobbyists, all of whom reinforce their scripted reality. When real-life struggles become nothing more than talking points, politicians lose their ability to connect with the people they represent. Chapter 4: Data-Driven Disconnect. When numbers fail the people, one of the biggest mistakes politicians make is relying too much on data. Numbers can be useful, but they don't always tell the full story. In fact, data can sometimes obscure the real problems people face. Politicians love to cite statistics, like unemployment rates or GDP growth, to show their policies are working. But those numbers often hide the struggles many people experience on the ground. For example, unemployment might be down, but that doesn't account for underemployment or stagnant wages. A 2020 report by the Economic Policy Institute found that while overall unemployment decreased, nearly 25% of workers were stuck in low-wage jobs with little opportunity for growth. The data politicians tout often paints a rosier picture than reality. Data can also be manipulated to support a specific narrative. This is called data cherry-picking, where politicians highlight favorable stats while ignoring the bigger picture. A classic example of this is when a government might boast about high job creation but fail to mention that most of those jobs are part-time or temporary. This tactic can make it seem like progress is being made when, in reality, the situation remains dire for many people. In his book Weapons of Math Destruction, Cathy O'Neil talks about how data-driven systems can often perpetuate inequality. She argues that these systems are built without considering the lived experiences of real people. Politicians who rely too much on data risk falling into this trap. They begin to see people as numbers, losing touch with the human side of governance. Ultimately, when politicians focus too much on data, they miss the nuanced problems that numbers can't capture. A poll may show that 60% of voters approve of a new policy, but it won't reveal the real struggles of the 40% who disapprove. Numbers are important, but they should be balanced with real-world experiences and empathy. Without that balance, politicians risk making decisions that fail to solve the problems people actually face. Chapter 5: The Perks Problem. How power breeds comfort. Power comes with perks, and for many politicians, those perks become a problem. Free travel, luxury hotels, and access to top-tier events, these benefits can create a comfortable bubble that's hard to leave. Once politicians get used to this lifestyle, it's easy for them to lose sight of what life is like for the average citizen. The perks of power can lead to a disconnect that affects their ability to govern effectively. Consider the fact that members of Congress receive an average annual salary of $174,000, more than 3 times the median household income in the US, and that's just the beginning. Many politicians enjoy perks like special healthcare plans, pension benefits, and allowances for travel and office expenses. These benefits create a lifestyle that's far removed from what most people experience. This disconnect is further highlighted by the fact that many politicians never leave this world of privilege. In his book This Town, Mark Leibovich writes about the permanent political class in Washington, where politicians and lobbyists move between government and private sector roles, all while enjoying the perks of power. This creates a culture of entitlement, where politicians come to expect the luxuries that come with their positions. When politicians live in this world of comfort, it becomes harder for them to understand the struggles of those who don't. For example, when was the last time a politician had to worry about paying for healthcare or affording college tuition? These are everyday concerns for millions of people, but they're often abstract concepts for politicians who enjoy the perks of power. The perks problem isn't just about material wealth, it's about how those perks shape a politician's worldview. When you're constantly surrounded by luxury, it's easy to forget what life is like for those who aren't. This leads to policies that favor the wealthy and well-connected, while leaving everyone else behind. In the end, grassroots movements are a powerful reality check for politicians who have lost touch. They remind leaders that the world is constantly changing and that they need to stay connected to the people if they want to remain relevant. Without this wake-up call, politicians risk becoming obsolete in a world that's moving forward without them.